Hey, welcome back to another 109. Here we are in the middle of a series where we're talking about what did Jesus do on his last week on earth to kind of end that season of his ministry and help prepare for a new season of his ministry. And so the time with the most intense examples of what he did in that period of time was his last week of what we call Passion Week, the things that he was most passionate about, the things with which he had the most passion for. That's what we get to see in a lot of stories in that last week of Jesus' life. So, point being here, at this point, we're recording this and it's December. It's the end of a year. That's a perfectly natural time to consider, all right, so what can we do to kind of wrap up the season and start a new one? Of course, this is applicable anytime you might have a season coming to a close somewhere else in the calendar year or after an event maybe that you won't be having anymore, go to some new season of your life or your work, anything. This is hopefully helpful as we consider what to do in that time.
Yeah. And if you read about the last week of Jesus' life in scripture, there are many, many, many things he did. He did way more than four things in the month of December. At the end of this year and kind of starting into January, we're focusing on four of the things on Jesus's last to-do list. The first week, we talked about celebration. What are you celebrating? What is worth celebrating? What can we look back on over the previous year, over the work that you've been doing, over the relationships you've built, over the successes you've had that's worth celebrating? And then take time to intentionally celebrate those things.
And then the second week, we talked about flipping the tables. Jesus has that famous story of when he went into the temple and just flipped the tables of all the money changers and everything, that they had lost sight of what that space was for. Sometimes we lose sight of what this space that we are creating for people is for. And so just things creep in to your habits, your routines that don't need to be there anymore. So sometimes we need to flip the tables in our own life and our work. Now, today we are looking at the next thing that Jesus did on his last to-do list. Item number 3 is establish new rhythms. It comes from Luke 22:19. It's in other books of the Gospels as well, but this is the one we're looking at, where Jesus is having his what we call the Last Supper or the communion with his disciples. And we got to understand the context for this is this takes place during the Passover meal. Now, that's been a yearly celebration for the Jewish people for centuries at this point, millennia even. But Jesus, and there is a script that goes along with that. There's an expected, this is what you do, this is what you say, this is what you eat, this is how you go about it. You observe this whole ceremony around this Passover supper. Well, Jesus kind of added some things. He went off script a little bit, and in so doing, established some new patterns for people. So check out Luke 22:19. By the way, this is a continuation of the worksheet we've been working on, ending and beginning seasons. This is page number 3. But reading from Luke 22:19, and he took bread, and when he had given thanks, he broke it and gave it to them, saying, "This is my body, which is given for you. Do this in remembrance of me." So we hear this when we have communion at church. It's a common phrase. We also know he goes on to share wine and pass that around and say, "This is my blood, which is poured out for you." What Jesus is doing here is he's establishing a new rhythm for his believers, his followers to follow even after this season is done. And as they start a new season of life, what is going to be important for them to remember and remember continually? The way we remember things is, well, multiple ways, but one of the most effective ways is to kind of tie it to something that you're naturally inclined to do anyway. Like I said, this is the Passover supper. This is something they were going to observe every year. Now, not just that, it was also a meal. We eat 3 times a day, hopefully. And so even just with that, there was established of like, all right, hey, even whenever you see bread, whenever you see wine, you can remember me in this way. So he's establishing new rhythms. Now, for us, what does that mean? Obviously, I hope you have communion. I hope you observe the Lord's Supper with other believers throughout the year at various times. Great, do that. That's not the point here necessarily. For you and your work, consider what is important for your own spiritual health, your own physical health, healthy work practices, things that you want to continue to celebrate. Because again, this Passover is a celebration.
Mhm.
This actually did go back to the time where this they were slaves in Egypt, and if they painted the door with the blood of the perfect lamb, then the angel of death would pass over them and not harm them. It's a celebration of that. So you could celebrate what God has done regularly in that way. So think of these relationships. What habits would do you need to establish to help keeping those things healthy?
And these rhythms could be yearly. You might celebrate an anniversary of when you started something or when you partnered with someone. You might, just as we celebrate wedding anniversaries or birthdays annually or holidays, these can be monthly things. It can be like a once a month thing, rhythm that you get into with your work and with your practices. It could be weekly or daily.
How
But
do you end your workday? Is there something that you want to do, a prayer or a little thing you do to kind of celebrate a workday, even on a daily basis? You can make this as frequent as you need.
but establishing those rhythms to um to recognize and keep the most important thing to recognize in your relationship with the Lord, to recognize his work in your life and in your work, and to celebrate the things that are most important. Because I don't know about you, but when I'm like deep in my work and I'm kind of going through the daily grind, it's easy to just feel like it's what I just said, the daily grind. You're just kind of grinding through, you're putting out fires as they come up, you're making plans, you're not living up to your plans, you're writing down goals, you're not living up to your goals. There's all these kinds of things that you can get caught up on. And so the wisdom in setting up some rhythms, as Jesus establishes for us, is saying, hey, it's really important to, whenever you do this, remember me, remember the sacrifice that Jesus made, remember the significance of what this is, remember his place in it, remember your place in his larger narrative and his larger story and God's plans. So those kinds of
And not
mentalities.
always just remembering things in the past, but also uh, consider the goals that you have. Like
Mhm.
Jesus's goal was also unity for his followers,
That's good.
and your own goals for your own physical health. We set goals and rhythms, maybe in terms of exercise or diet, all sorts of these things. Now it can be overwhelming. Be like, okay, I guess what I got. I know I need to be healthier. I need to have better work rhythms. How do we start? Here, we can go through these questions here in this worksheet to just kind of unpack this a little bit. First of all, what's vital to the continuation of your work? Like what in your work or is part of your life that if you didn't do that, you would kind of derail and lose sight of this mission that God has for you? What needs to keep happening in order for you to continue doing what you're doing? Then, what can you do to make it memorable? This is kind of an open ended question. I can't answer that for you necessarily, but uh, what could you do that is kind of a benefit to you to because all of this is it should be pleasant, it should be something you're excited to do, it should be you should receive some benefit from it in some way. Other, if it's painful, then you're
Mhm.
not going to want to do it. It's not going to become a rhythm or a habit. But what fun thing, what nice thing can you do to make it memorable? And finally, how often should it be observed? Again, it could be daily, monthly, once a year, depends on what it is. Um, but the question is, can you tie it to something that you already do or have it be part of an existing process that you already have? I'll stop sharing. You can check out your worksheet there on page 3 of that. But tying it to something that you naturally do is a powerful way to link up a little bit of celebration or link up a healthy habit into to what you naturally do. Uh, if every time um, if you need to do something very important after talking with a potential client, let's just make that a rhythm, right? Or putting something in some sort of celebration channel or folder or whatever, like every time you want to remember to celebrate such a thing, what kind of rhythms can you already link up to that you could then build this whole network of remembrance, really, based on something happening.
If you have kids, there's kind of a natural daily rhythm of when they go to school, when they come back to school. Is there something that you can link for your kingdom work to when the kids go out of the house? I'm going to read my Bible. I'm going to connect with the Lord. I'm going to pray over the work that I'm doing. Is there something you can put into your weekly rhythm? Every Friday, I'm going to take a moment to celebrate what happened that week. Or in the Grove, this is a weekly rhythm. The Grove 109 is a weekly Thursday rhythm because we believe it's important in our work to continually be growing and learning and training. And so it's part of our rhythms to create this content. It's part of the Grove rhythm to engage with this content and work through it.
And it helped us to schedule it, call it 109s and schedule it for 109 in the afternoon on Thursdays, just because
that's a significant number.
It's a significant number based on the verse in Colossians that we talk about. So link it to something that means something. You know, if it doesn't mean anything, then it's gonna be easy to forget.
Yeah. And so this can be something super spiritual, like I said, like scheduling a time to read your Bible or pray for the work that you're doing. It can be something not super spiritual. It could just be scheduling out the days and creating, like the new year is a great time because it's where our minds are culturally anyway. It can be a great time to reset and reestablish our weekly rhythms, our weekly time blocking, how are we using our hours every day to accomplish the things that we need to make sure that everything's getting taken care of in an appropriate amount of time. And like we were saying earlier, it could be a monthly celebration. It could be a yearly anniversary that you celebrate, but consider it. You're not going to figure that out in the few minutes that we've been talking here, but take time as you end this season and prepare for the next. That's what we're talking about in this. As we end one season, as we prepare for the next, take the time to consider what rhythms can be established so that you are pursuing the work, the mission that God has put on your heart to do, to build his kingdom here on earth in a way that only you can, in a more effective and intentional way.
If what you're doing right now as a part of your day, if you did that every day, does that get you closer to where you want to be? Or does it kind of veer off? And it's part of flipping tables, right? Sometimes you might need to clear something out to make a new rhythm, but it's all about intentionality so that you can, as a natural part of how you go about your life, make those steps closer and closer to fulfilling this mission that God has on your heart.
Yeah,
that's the point. So awesome. Well, this has been a good conversation about establishing new rhythms. Let us know in the comments here on this post what your thoughts are about a new rhythm or maybe an old one that you want to try to get rid of. Let us know what your thoughts are, and we'll see you next time.
If you're watching this in an email, then let us know.
Just reply. It's actually Kelsey. She's gonna read it and everything. So great.
All right. Take care. We will see you next week for the thrilling conclusion of Jesus' last to-do list.